Greetings, fellow horror fans.
This is Freaks Movie Reviews, a new channel to bring everyone who just loves horror movies together. That is right, we will be posting movie reviews where we go over some of the good, the bad, and the even worse. We'll also be making director smashdowns, where we take a look at the work of some of the best directors in the horror genre. Yeah, I said the best. And there's also gonna be top 10 lists like this one and much more. So be sure to check it out. Now before we dive head on into reviewing, it seemed appropriate to me that the first video be something special. So I decided to start out with the top 10 of my all-time favorite horror movies. Because what better way to start a new review channel than to stuff my egotistical opinions down your throat. I am not claiming that these are the best horror movies out there. These are just the films that I simply can't get enough of. Those I have watched over and over and over again. So you won't find the great classics like Psycho or Halloween or The Exorcist on here. It doesn't mean I don't like them, they're just not my favorite horror movies. Fuck you! So if you don't agree, please don't scream or go apeshit. It's all opinion based, obviously. Even though this is a top 10 list, I feel I owe it to the runner-ups to give them at least a mention. So here they are. These are the movies that didn't quite make the list, but they're still pretty darn good. If you haven't seen any of these, be sure to check them out. And now let's move on to the real list. These are my top 10 favorite horror movies of all time. Number 10. A Nightmare on Elm Street 3. Dream Warriors. Okay, so this may be a bit of a surprise to some of you. How did the second sequel of the famed Freddy Krueger series make it onto this list?
Oh my god.
Well, I bought the Nightmare on Elm Street box set recently, planning to give all these sequels a watch. Now, I was very skeptical at first, especially after seeing the horrendous first sequel. But boy, how wrong was I. Dream Warriors is not only good, I think it's even better than the original Nightmare on Elm Street. What? Why? Well, for as much as I love the original Wes Craven flick, I must admit it has some problems. Krueger and Nancy are interesting characters, but the rest?
I don't think you're crazy. And stop drinking that damn coffee.
Not so much. I even think Johnny Depp is a bore in it, and he's one of my favorite actors. Used to be. Robert Englund and Heather Langenkamp reprised their roles as Krueger and Nancy respectively. But the movie's main focus is on these misfit teens. They are institutionalized as they all have a mental disorder and therefore all have a weakness. And that's much more engaging. It also makes for some of the most inventive and original death scenes in horror history. In the original, Krueger just kills people in an over-the-top way. That's fine by me, but here he uses their weakness against them. Well, that's much more interesting. What's also more engaging is that the kids get together to fight back in their dreams, where they can have all kinds of powers.
Well, that's just freaking cool!
I wish I could control my dreams like that. I wonder what that would look like. Anyway, it can get silly sometimes, but it's the right kind of silly. It's not like I'm going to take Freddy Krueger seriously anyway. He can get completely over the top and still be damn scary. That is why I think he's one of the best horror monsters ever. Sorry Michael, but you're a little boring. Why don't you move once in a while? Director Chuck Russell really knows how to keep the story compelling, amusing and suspenseful at the same time. He really knows how to work with scary, silly monsters, like Krueger in this film and later in his career The Blob and Jim Carrey.
She is so coy.
Dream Warriors is funny, scary, inventive, surprisingly complex. It is everything a good 80s horror movie has to be, and I just love it.
Never sleep again.
Numéro 9. C'est arrivé près de chez vous. This 1992 cult classic may have been just a graduation project of some film students, but it is by far the best Belgian movie ever made. The film is set up as a mockumentary, where we follow the life of a serial killer played by Benoit Poulvorde and his killing spree in and around the city. The official English title is Man Bites Dog, which I don't think is just as strong as the original title, which translates to
It took place close to the door.
What makes this film so great is the tone, and how it changes over the course of the story. It starts out as a dark comedy. The serial killer is a real Ted Bundy style character. He is suave, clever, funny, outspoken, musical, even poetic. You might even say he's a cool guy. But then he commits the most gruesome murders in such a nonchalant way, like it's an everyday 9-to-5 job. This makes for an especially scary human being. He can switch to crazy mode at any time, making him very unpredictable and therefore fun to watch. Like Joe Pesci in the 90s. He is a monster, but in such a fascinating way that you just can't stop watching. He's kinda like Hannibal Lecter or Patrick Bateman or Donald Trump. It is really disturbing that he shows no remorse for his actions whatsoever. He kills men, women, children, old people. It doesn't matter to him. It's just something he does for a living. A great portion of the comedy comes from this.
Son poids, normalement, un homme moyen, comme cette victime-ci, c'est 3 fois son poids. Mais sinon, par exemple, ça change, hein, tu vois, pour les enfants ou pour les nains, ça change. Pour un enfant, il est plus léger, un enfant, hein. C'est 2 fois son poids.
However, the comedic tone of the movie drastically changes when the crew filming him begins to take part in his crimes. First helping him to hide the bodies, then holding down the arms and legs of a child he's choking. Okay. At some point they even all join in raping and killing a woman. Oh yeah, this movie is really fun. At this point the story is definitely on horror territory. The tone shifts in such a way that you, the viewer, starts to feel guilty for laughing with the dark jokes earlier. Imagine watching Jules and Vincent in Pulp Fiction. Yeah, they kill people, but they're also funny and interesting. And then, out of nowhere, you see them commit the most brutal of murders. That is this movie. It makes for a unique and unforgettable viewing experience, especially because of its realistic approach. At some times you even think you're watching a real documentary. A very sick one. Once you've seen it, you won't be forgetting it soon.
Hein? Allez, oui.
Number 8 is a tie between Juan the Grudge and Ringe. I felt obligated to include at least one Japanese horror movie on this list, because they basically invented the modern horror genre. I mean, even when they're not trying to make horror movies, they're scary as hell. But I just couldn't decide which one I like better, Ju-on or Ringu. Now for me, The Ring was one of the first horror movies I ever saw. I was around 10 years old and it really scared the shit out of me. So naturally, I loved it. This is the movie that sparked a love for horror movies I still carry on to this day. I don't believe the story needs any introduction. The curse that is passed on by video is so well known that it has been referenced a million times in pop culture. I wouldn't even be surprised if it spawned something called Japanese girlophobia. You know, fear of long-haired Japanese girls. The Ring is not particularly scary, but there is a menacing and haunting atmosphere throughout the film. Even when there's nothing going on, we feel the lingering curse and the time ticking away. The cinematography is subtle but very effective, driving the suspense to Hitchcock levels. Of course, there is this one scene that is shit in your pants scary. You all know which one I'm talking about. Just listen to that screeching sound. And then there's of course the eye. That fucking eye.
The great eye.
The Ring was a great movie when it came out, and it's still a great one to this day. Every single time I watch that one scene, it still sends shivers down my spine. But then there is Ju-on the Grudge. This movie is so scary that when I first watched it, I had to watch My Neighbor Totoro immediately after, just to even it out. The scene with Sadako crawling out of the TV? Yeah, imagine a whole freaking movie like that. Ju-on is about a house that is cursed and has ghosts in it. Pretty basic, right? Yeah, sure, but the movie is set up in different chapters, and each one follows the same formula. We follow someone go into the house, some of the scariest shit you ever saw happens until the person is killed off, and then we just go to the next victim. Now this may sound a little lazy at first, and it is, but it's actually very effective in terms of horror. This way the horror never takes a break. There is barely room for you to breathe. When a character is killed off, they can just start from scratch and build the horror up all over again.
Oh yeah.
The ghosts are those of a woman and son who were slaughtered brutally by an insane person. Since then they haunt whoever steps into the house. What really gets me is that even though they are ghosts, they still appear in flesh and bone, but they move and sound very naturally. This places them deep down in the uncanny valley. It is similar to Sadako's eye. The ghosts look almost completely human, but there's something off about them that creates unease and gives you the chills. I also love the film because of the way the horror is executed. Most movies like these usually rely on cheap jump scares. Scaring people with a creepy face and a loud sound effect is not that hard. In Ju-on, the jump scares are rarely used. And the horror mostly comes from building up the suspense. This evokes a completely different emotion. Instead of feeling startled for a couple of seconds, you feel terror and ambiguity and fear, and you feel that throughout the entire scene, which is what a good horror movie is supposed to do. The Japanese mastered the horror genre perfectly, and both The Ring and Ju-on the Grudge are the prime examples of that. Number 7.
How many killings?
7.
7. I love David Fincher. I'm a big fan. I think he's one of the most competent visual storytellers of our time, and I love all his work. Most of his work. His films are mostly thrillers, like Panic Room, Zodiac, Gone Girl, but 7 is straight out horror. It is without a doubt the darkest buddy cop movie ever, starring Brad Pitt and Morgan Freeman, who are trying to catch a psychopath who kills his victims in a pattern of the 7 deadly sins. There's gluttony, greed, pride, lust, sloth, envy, and watching Miley Cyrus. Their obsessive search brings them to a man named John Doe, who is chillingly played by the always great Kevin Spacey. He holds a mirror of society, showing us the worst of humanity through the people he kills. He really believes he's making the world a better place, and that he's doing God's work. What a sick fuck. 7 has some very disturbing scenes, but the questions it raises are even more so. Like, why is it always raining? I'm not going to give the ending away for those few of you who haven't seen it yet, but I will say that the conclusion leaves you with a bitter taste, which seems to be a motive in Fincher's films. They often revolve around the inevitable, destiny and fate and all that. The movie shines because of the great performances, from the leads as well as the supporting cast. But what really makes the movie stand out for me is the dark and gripping cinematography. The clever use of camera angles and movement, lighting and editing gives us an excellent piece of cinema, where so much information is shown instead of being told, especially the relation between the characters. It's very enjoyable to see the two detectives grow to each other, purely through the composition of the frame. The great eye of detail and near-perfect mastery of film as a visual medium can be found in all of Fincher's work. Great directing like this, I'm sad to say, is way too rare in the horror genre that I love so much. 7 may not be the best serial killer movie, but the great performances, outstanding direction and all-around disturbing atmosphere makes me watch it again and again. I just can't get enough of David Fincher, and I'm sure he can't get enough of us.
I think people are perverts.
Nummer 6. Nosferatu, Phantom der Nacht. Werner Herzog's take on the Dracula story is a remake of one of the first horror films ever made. In my opinion, the story works much better when Dracula is portrayed as a real monster, rather than a suave, deceiving gentleman. Most Draculas, for me, come off as some kind of serial killer who pretends to be nice and mysterious, while he's actually really evil. Well, that's fine, except he's a vampire, he's a monster. When he can seduce women looking like this, that is much more frightening. In this film, he is played by Klaus Kinski, one of the best actors of all time. You'd think Herzog cast him to save on makeup, but he's actually worked with him a number of times, like in Aguirre, Fitzcarraldo, Wojciech and Cobra Verde. It figures a man who was a total lunatic in real life would give a damn scary performance when cast as one of the most famous of vampires. And is he scary? Really scary. Nosferatu follows the classic Bram Stoker story beat by beat, but this time under Werner Herzog's direction. He likes to work with symbolic and poetic imagery, often blurring the line between fantasy and reality. Because of this, the film plays out as some kind of bad fever dream. You never know what to expect, even though you know how the story goes. I just love the absurdity of some of the shots, especially those with all the rats in it. Most of the imagery relates to the fragility of life and the mercilessness of death. Nosferatu shows us, however, that there are indeed things worse than death. That is Bruno Ganz playing Jonathan Harker, by the way, who you may know from another movie.
Das war ein Befehl!
That's right, it's Hitler! But here he's totally being owned by Kinski. Sorry, Adolf. Nosferatu is just a fascinating piece of cinema. And if you're wondering if Francis Ford Coppola's Dracula is on this list...
Oh, yes.
It is no laughing matter.
It's not. Numero 5. Rec. The Spanish have made their way into horror over the past few decades, often relying on ghost stories, like in El Espinazo del Diablo, Los Otros, y El Orfanato. And even though I like these movies a lot, I don't think they're that scary. Rec, on the other hand... Damn. Talk about a scary film. Rec is shot as a found footage movie, like Blair Witch and the always pleasant Cannibal Holocaust. And while I do think that the Blair Witch Project is a better movie in every way, Rec is the one I keep turning to when I want to show my friends a good scary movie. Because let's be frank here, Blair Witch is not for everybody. And when you watch it a second time, it's still interesting, but maybe not as frightening as the first time.
Oh my god, what the fuck is that?
Rec is still frightening after you watched it a dozen times. The movie follows the life and work of firemen at night when they get a call of an old woman who locked herself in her apartment.
But they're about to find out that this isn't your average old woman.
There's some kind of virus going around, turning people into rabid, zombie-like monsters. The apartment block is being shut off from the outside world, so the people and camera crew are trapped inside and therefore severely fucked. What follows is a non-stop ride of scares. The movie is so fast-paced, you'll keep to the edge of your seat until the very end. I also like how near the ending you get some kind of idea how it all got started, where most movies like this keep you completely in the dark. You know, so they can fuck it all up in the sequels or the shitty remake. I can't even say that much more about Rec. If you're looking for a damn scary film, look no further and give it a watch. But don't be surprised if your pants start to feel warmer. Number 4. Alien. Alien is often seen as one of the best science fiction movies ever made, but I also find that it's one of the best horror movies ever made, as it is basically a haunted house story set in space. Everyone knows the plot by now. A group of spacemen discover a planet full of eggs, and then John Hurt gets French kissed by one of those facehuggers, his tummy gives birth to Xenomorph, our monster for the evening, and the rest is basically your everyday monster movie. But what makes this movie one of the best sci-fi horrors ever is the direction and cinematography. Like Seven, this masterpiece really knows how to set up and execute a horror story through visuals.
It's not there. I mean, it's got to be around there somewhere.
Just look at the opening sequence, where we get a tour of the ship. Not only does it set the mood for how isolated this place is, but it also sets up how the ship is designed and where everything is located. So that later, when the crew is being terrorized by the alien, we have some idea how far or close he is. That's really clever. My favorite scene is this one, with the metal chains hanging from the ceiling. It just shows how masterful the movie's pacing is. At first it's like time slows down, where we can build up the suspense, while Brett is looking around. Meanwhile, we only hear the constant sound of the chains and some water dripping down. It suggests that Brett is not alone. And then there is the reveal of the alien, just hanging motionless on one of the chains. When the alien is coming down for the kill, he makes no sound whatsoever, clearly showing us how much of a cunning predator he is. It is only when the cat snarls, Brett looks around to see how the large killing machine was able to sneak up on him. Sorry Brett, but you're fucked. You never had a chance. Xenomorph is by far the creepiest movie monster ever. He is fast, cunning, unforgiving, has acid for blood, but I also love how much of an alien he is. Quite a stretch, I know. What I mean is, we're dealing with a species that is clearly not of this world. It is hard to tell what it's contemplating and thinking, if it's thinking at all. You never get to know if the alien's just evil, or he's acting on instinct, or what. Mostly, aliens are very similar to humans or similar to animals, or they're the movie's Holocaust. But Xenomorph is neither, making him very unpredictable, and thus
horrifying.
It goes without saying that the art direction and production design is outstanding as well. Not only the look of the alien is frightening, but also the ship. It looks dirty and old and has lots of tight spaces and corridors, which gives it a claustrophobic feel, making it the ideal location for people to get killed in, and also the perfect opportunity for director Ridley Scott to carry out his fetish for things being wet. Alien is and always will be one of the great horror classics.
Oh, I feel dead. Anybody ever tell you look dead, man?
Number 3. The Shining. Every time I watch The Shining, I discover something new, something that makes the story even more shocking and horrifying. Stanley Kubrick is without a doubt one of the best directors who ever lived. Sorry, Alfred. He is a master of complex storytelling, cramming his films full of symbolism, hidden context, clever foreshadowing, and even subliminal messages.
Smoke.
At first, The Shining looks like your average psychological flick, with some ghost elements in it. But there is so much more going on. The story also deals with child abuse, obsession, addiction, possession, desire. I don't even want to know. There are even people who claim it hints at genocide and the Holocaust and the Greek myth of the Minotaur and the Illuminati and the moon landing. Okay, so this movie may be a magnet for conspiracy nuts. But it remains a very successful horror film nonetheless. It just goes to show that the story is still shrouded in mystery and that it raises more questions than answers them, as usual in Kubrick's work. Nicholson, as always, delivers a great performance. The Overlook Hotel is huge, so there's a lot of scenery for him to chew on. Now, some people find he's a bad casting decision because he already looks batshit insane right from the start. But that is because he is. The crazy psycho monster is resting in all of us, at least according to Kubrick. All his work is based around that idea. The ghostly images and elements of the hotel are only there to help Jack on the way. Kubrick really knows how to scare us on a subconscious level, by changing props, or by creating sets that are impossible, or by casting Shelley Duvall. It is not the scariest film I've ever seen, but it's so dense, every frame has so much going on, that I keep coming back, trying to find something new that Kubrick has hidden for us. I find it to be one of the most fascinating horror movies to have ever come out.
David Letterman! Hi, David. I'm Grandpa. Don't!
Number 2. Dawn of the Dead. Night of the Living Dead by George A. Romero is a masterpiece.
They're coming to get you, Barbara.
It started a whole zombie craze and was filled with social satire and political commentary. However, it is a bit fucking boring. To be honest, it has not aged well. Its sequel, Dawn of the Dead, is a pretty goddamn solid movie. It is by far the best zombie movie ever made. Like its predecessor, it is filled with commentary. It largely takes place in a shopping mall, where zombies instinctively want to go to. This of course is a splendid wink to consumerism and mass consumption. The only difference between us and the flesh-eating zombies is... especially when you realize that the protagonists, who are safe there and have everything they could ever want or need, are not happy and eventually try to escape their safe prison. The movie takes you on a journey, showing us step by step how this handful of people managed to survive the zombie apocalypse for so long. It almost plays out as an instruction video, so I always keep it handy for when the zombies are coming. Naturally, it is filled with some really gory scenes. Limbs are torn, heads explode, guts are eaten, and all in that marvelous Technicolor of the 70s. Oh boy, how I love that look. But there are a lot of funny scenes also, like the rednecks who take pleasure killing the zombies off. For them, the zombie apocalypse is a jolly occasion. It's like the most fun they had in years. It's so oddly realistic. It wouldn't surprise me if there are rednecks with a step-by-step plan for when the zombies are really coming.
I go, look, dude, I don't know anything about guns. They terrify me, but I'm worried about the zombies. All right? Dude's just like, you need a shotgun. You need a shotgun, man. It's got a good spread.
I like it how the movie doesn't take itself so seriously. It's about zombies after all. I really hate it when a zombie story is trying to be dark and grim and serious and unoriginal and overrated. Dawn of the Dead never shies away from being too over the top while remaining a solid horror movie. Everything's great in it. The acting's great. The makeup is great, great location, great direction, great soundtrack by Goblin, and of course, need we forget the greatest horror tagline ever.
When there's no more room in hell, the dead will walk the earth.
It's just a great, great film.
No, damn it! I'm talking about the zombies that have taken over South Park.
Well, Evel Knievel, why don't you jump over them with your rocket cycle?
Oh, the hell with you both.
Before revealing my number one spot, I just want to say that my pick for my favorite horror movie ever may be a bit of a surprise. Number 1, The Human Centipede. Here you have a good, original and inventive concept that is executed in such a... No, I'm just kidding, that movie is shit. My number 1 favorite horror movie is and always will be the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Tobe Hooper's Texas Chainsaw Massacre is not particularly frightening, nor is it explicitly gory, but it is disturbing. Very, very disturbing. It is weird, dark, incredibly violent, controversial, and most of all, timeless. Even after all those years, it still manages to shock and disgust. It is a nightmare that never stops. Once the train starts rolling, it is a roller coaster ride of pure horror till the end. And for me, this is the real deal. This is what true horror masterpiece looks like. It looks horror with the low-budget documentary style of cinematography. It sounds horror with a soundtrack consisting of slaughterhouse noises. It just breathes horror. It is basically the plot of every slasher movie where a group of youngsters get the axe, or in this case the chainsaw, by some deranged lunatic.
I smell emotional issues.
But it's amazing to me how far this movie takes its setup and how dark and demented the horror is displayed. Especially when we get to see the whole family that is so dysfunctional that it makes the Manson family look normal. One of the things that Texas Chainsaw Massacre is so great at is the power of suggestion. Despite its reputation, there is a minimum on gore used, barely showing us a single drop of blood. Like this scene where one of the victims is hung on a meat hook. No blood, but through the clever camera use and editing, we know all too well what's going on. Or what about the very first killing scene? It is just so brutal. Leatherface is slaughtering these poor people like cattle. Again, no gore, but one of the most disturbing images to be ever put on film. It's funny because apparently the reason behind showing almost no gore was so the movie could get a PG rating. Of course this backfired, making the movie even more horrifying than it already was, so it still ended up with an R rating. I could go on and on talking about my favorite horror film and why I absolutely love it so much, but I don't want to give too much away. If you haven't seen it yet, just give it a watch and see for yourself why the Texas Chainsaw Massacre is still considered to be one of the best horror movies ever made. So there you go, these were my 10 favorite horror movies. If you want to share your favorite movies, let me know in the comments below. I hope we're off to a good start and that you'll be tuning in for the upcoming reviews about spider horror movies. That is right, we will be reviewing horror flicks with a certain theme every month. So tune in for the next episode, which will be a review of the movie Spiders. Yeah, really, that is the title. Original, I know.